I am Jason Martinez, Division Chair of Counseling here at the college, and I have my fabulous colleague.
I'm Catherine Cochran, counseling faculty at the college.
And our other fabulous colleague.
Aaliyah.
So we are going to be doing a lot more sessions like this over the next couple of years, ramping up our programming. All of it is going to be based around mental health, health and wellness, mental health and wellness, however you want to phrase it. It'll include all kinds of topics like today's topic about grief and bereavement, healthy relationships, depression awareness, mental health awareness. All those kinds of things will be coming up over the next 1 to 2 years in terms of programming from us in collaboration with people like CTL and Lyle and some others. So be looking for future programming counseling related to mental health issues. So welcome to the first official one. Thank you, Liz, for hosting us and for partnering with us. Hello, Patty. And so we are going to begin the presentation about grief. There are resources at your table that we will talk about later. There is also a box of Kleenex at every table, intentionally, because sometimes these conversations just get emotional, right? Especially the conversation we're having today about grief and bereavement. Go ahead. Okay, so we have an agenda, things we're going to discuss. Again, this is a highly emotional topic. It can be. There are all of us, every single one of us are one, you're going to die. You didn't know, sorry to tell you. All of us are going to pass away. But before that happens, all of us are going to have people that we care about pass away. Okay? And mind you, grief expands into other types of loss and bereavement outside of losing an individual. But for the purpose of this conversation today, we're largely focused on the loss of a loved one, a friend, a family member, this death. Okay? So all of you are going to pass away, but before that happens, all of you are going to lose somebody. So we're really talking about the process of grief and bereavement today, and how colorful it can be, how ambiguous it can be, how long it may last, how sometimes it never ends, sometimes it changes forms. It presents itself at odd times in weird ways. And so all of that is completely normal for the human experience. So we're going to be talking about all that stuff. So the agenda today is coping with loss, stages of grief, dealing with a major loss, healthy coping versus unhealthy coping, and simple and easy and creative ways to remember loved ones or remember people that have passed on. Okay? My online audience, can you hear us all right?
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, good.
Thank you. So I'm going to share a video with you guys. What is grief? What is coping with loss? The loss of a loved one is a very emotionally impactful event. It's probably the most stressful life event that any of us will go through. It can cause major emotional crisis after the death of someone you love. You experience what is called bereavement, which literally means being deprived by death. So the stages of grief, actually hit the video link. So we're gonna have really quick refresh on the stages of grief. Scroll down and hit that video. So as psychologists, counselors, etc.,
when we lose
Kubler-Ross was very ingrained in our upbringing about the stages of grief, and so this is just a really quick recap of Kubler-Ross's stages.
a loved one, the pain can feel unbearable. Psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed a theory suggesting we go through 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. The first stage in this theory, denial, helps us minimize the overwhelming pain of loss. We attempt to pretend that the loss does not exist as a way to protect ourselves from intense emotional suffering. Trying to adjust to a new reality can cause extreme emotional discomfort, which often leads to anger. There is so much to process that anger may feel like it allows us an emotional outlet. In the bargaining stage, we may find ourselves creating what-if scenarios. And there are many ways we try to bargain, from praying to a higher power, to regretting past actions, to reliving past situations and imagining them playing out differently. Eventually, there comes a time when reality begins to set in. As our sadness grows, it's common to retreat, reaching out less to others about what we are going through. Although this is a natural stage of grief, dealing with depression can be extremely isolating. When we come to a place of acceptance, we still feel the pain of loss, but we are no longer resisting the reality of our situation. Everybody grieves differently, so you may or may not go through each of these stages or experience them in order. And as you process your grief, take the time you need, removing any expectation of how you should grieve.
So the 5 major stages are obviously denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But there is also the subsets of disbelief, confusion, sadness, yearning, like yearning kind of is that disbelief, humiliation, despair, and guilt. Guilt surprisingly happens a lot when someone passes. The guilt of unsaid things, unresolved issues, shoulda, coulda, woulda, those type of emotions come to the surface a lot for people when someone passes. And so it's just the normal range of expression of emotion during grief. And we all know it can be different, right? So maybe you had an elderly parent pass, or maybe you had an elderly relative who there was a gradual, slow decline, right? Maybe you've lost somebody suddenly in an accident or violence or something. That is a completely different initiation of the grief process. So these stages happen differently for everybody based on the personality of the person experiencing it, but also what happened in the event that triggered the grief and the bereavement. Next. So again, everybody goes through this stuff differently, and it's not linear like any psychological phenomenon. It's not linear. You can be stuck in a stage for a very, very long time. Sometimes people never accept the reality. Sometimes people move through these stages very fluidly and quickly, and that can be done through support, through counseling, talking, through being around other people, on those kinds of things. And we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation.
So dealing with a major loss, the actual experience may include holidays, get-togethers, landmark triggers, auditory triggers, hearing a favorite song. Maybe it's listening to the loved one singing happy birthday to you, hearing their voice from an old voice message or video. Smell, there's a cologne, perfume, maybe it was they smoked cigars, so there was a smell associated with that love. There's personal items. When someone leaves, these are true things that somebody has to go in and handle their personal items. They need a house, a bedroom, clothes, utilities, all those things, closing credit cards, utilities. At times it can feel like you're erasing a loan. Loans, bank accounts, and then there's the actual planning for memorial services, funeral, and all the logistics that go with that decision making, packing, moving. If it's a parent and you have another parent, how you care and provide for that parent and handling their grief along with yours. And so it just becomes this multitude of just never ending. And so we wanted to talk about these things because these are things that can happen. And sometimes you might anticipate, I'm gonna be really sad because the holidays are coming up. And sometimes with anticipation, you prepare for it. It's those moments though that is the unexpected grief, where you're driving around and you think of them, you hear a song and then it hits you. And so Jason said something earlier in the presentation, grief changes form. So our grief will change.
One of the things I want to bring to your attention is when we think about grief and loss, we often only think about the emotional piece. We don't ever think about the logistics until you actually have to start doing it. And this can be very painful and tedious and emotionally taxing. So my personal advice to you, like I've been through, so my mom passed in 2002 and my dad is 89. So this is a huge part of our conversations, right? This makes life a lot easier for people, for the survivors. Difficult conversations, if you've never had this conversation with somebody, especially an elderly parent or family member, I implore you to start these conversations because again, we're all gonna pass. So to deny that it's going to happen is not helping anybody, including yourself. So the more you can be mentally and emotionally prepared for something, the easier it will be to tread through it. So that's just that little caveat. Go ahead, next. So like I was saying, planning ahead lets your wishes be known. How many of you have actually like, no, there's some things I want said, there's some things I want done if I were to not be on this earth tomorrow. Have you written those down? Have you told somebody, you better do this or else? If you haven't, I would start thinking about stuff like that. Planning ahead offers peace of mind. You know that your family members are not going to be stressed out, go into debt, trying to find a casket for you, like all those kinds of things. Death is not free in America, unfortunately. So if you have literally not thought about this stuff, start thinking about it and be mentally prepared. There's nothing more stressful and emotional than a death. But when you add all the logistics of third parties on top of that, asking you for information, it makes it really difficult. Yeah.
We have a question online. It says, is it so very important to have the conversation?
It is, in my opinion, is extremely important to have the conversation. It provides emotional predictability for the person who will soon pass and the person who is going to be left to deal with it. Want to say anything else? Okay.
Here's another question.
Yeah, what's the other question?
I just wanted to put my input, so when my father-in-law passed, he didn't talk about his death plans aside from his son. So before an argument ensued about what they should do with him, his son stepped up and said, hey, he's personally told me, so it did make it go a lot smoother, but if he hadn't talked to that one person.
Absolutely, good point. Planning ahead offers flexible funding again. Death is not free in America, and this is another extremely stressful, especially in today's economy, people are already strapped, right? So imagine some massive life-changing emotional event that's also going to be extremely financially burdensome for you. So this is something to think about as well. My dad constantly reminds me, I have this done, this is taken care of, here's the paper, this is where you find it, blah, 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 blah. Okay, Dad, I don't want to talk about that right now, but you need to know. So I'm telling you, like, if he hadn't done it, I wouldn't do it. So I'm glad that he's doing it, because now I will end up returning the favor for my kids. Planning ahead relieves the burden from the family. Again, it's just, we already have a plan, we already know what's going to happen. We don't have to sit here and figure it all out while we're grieving. There's actually a roadmap. We need to contact so-and-so, we contact so-and-so, we're gonna do this with their body, we're gonna contact this person, you know, we're gonna close all these accounts, et cetera, et cetera. This is literally the uneasy logistical portion of grieving. If you haven't thought about it, you need to think.
I did want to add just, it's always good if you do have elderly parents or loved ones, having a will. It can get complicated if there was a previous marriage. There's legal, Arizona has legal sanctions, so unfortunately, death and dying can bring out ugliness and unexpected ugliness when sometimes some of these things aren't discussed or talked about. And so it's always good. It's hard and nobody wants to talk about it, but talking about a legal will, like what's going to happen, how this happens, because it is something that we don't think about, and it can happen immediately after a public passes or months, years later. So just something to keep in mind.
Yes, yeah, to your point, when my grandma passed, my dad has 11 brothers and sisters. And the last 3 of them are the ones that took care of her until she passed. But when she passed, the decision about what to do with her body, huge mess. Right, a huge fight between 12 siblings, adult siblings. So again, conversations are super important. The air needs to be cleared up before the person passes to make life easier for everybody. So yes, next slide. Security.
So I'm going to talk about healthy coping. And so I know a couple of my students are here, thank you. And so we were just talking about self-care in our classes, but healthy coping is extremely important during the time of, you're losing someone, during the time that you've lost someone, but taking care of yourself. I like to give my students the example of you have a pie and you give out all your pieces, you don't have anything left for yourself. You're not going to be any good to anyone if you cannot provide self-care for you. And I'm talking about the self-care of basic needs, period. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs triangle, the pyramid, the basic needs are you need to make sure you're eating, you're sleeping, you're breathing. So there's basic things. And so what I mean by that is, if you're not sleeping, you need to put yourself in a routine. You need to find a way to get you tired. Take away electronics before bedtime. Take a shower, put lavender lotion on. So there's different things that you can do with that. Eat well. Some people lose their appetite. Some people find coping in eating. So finding a balance. You want to make sure you're putting nutrition stuff in. So you are able, maybe it's just snacking stuff, but you want to make sure that you are eating. Breathing outdoors. There's just something that my colleague Jason and I agree on. There's just something about the vitamin D from the sun. We will go outside and walk around our building, but you just want to make sure that you're doing that. You're outside, breathing, small breaths, try to focus on your senses, touch something different, look at something new, try to listen to a new sound. So all these are little distractions. I'm talking to others. Again, who's your support system? Who's the 1 to 2 people that you can call up and you can talk to? Who are resources? And we're going to talk about resources on campus, off campus, but what are resources in the community? At here, Estrella, who are people you can call, what are national numbers? So there are times where you feel so alone and it's isolation and lonely and you're sad and it's just an unimaginable pain. But as you start in your mind, if you can think of a Venn diagram, your students, we did this. So you have yourself, but then you can start adding layers of who are those people, who are those people in contact, what are the resources. You're not so isolated and you feel that those are people that you can reach out to. Journaling is very ranged, and it depends. It's going to be individual for all of us. I personally, I like to journal my thoughts. I leave a notebook next to my bed, especially something I don't understand. Sometimes when we write it out or we share it with somebody, it's helpful because then we can look and make sure, why was I thinking that? But then it's also a way to remember. We'll talk about remembering a little bit. Reading books on read. After a presentation, we do have several books. I just went to a library and checked out some. Tear Scoop is a great book for children, it's a children's book, it talks about grief. Because that's another element, having children, how you prepare a child losing a loved one. When you say that books are a good way to communicate that. And
Question.
What do you do when you feel like you don't have the support system you need and the loss is so deep that you also feel like you can't go on? You also feel like God has
let you down. Thank you, that's a very honest question. I would say if you're willing, we can talk more after the presentation. There are resources, it's a very honest response. That,
And a very normal response.
right,
Right, especially if you're religious, you experience these extreme losses, it makes you question stuff, right? That, you know, if you weren't, if it doesn't follow your narrative and something shocking happened, it can yank your chain, basically, like, you know, God didn't serve me, like, what's going on? So that's a very, very normal reaction. I would implore you to stick around and we can provide you some talking points, some resources, some connections. And so please stay after the presentation. We can talk a little more about your comment.
yes, absolutely, which brings me to the last bullet, support groups. Jason brought up a good church, you know, places of faith, there are groups there, community groups, there are national hotlines, we have a couple on another slide. But again, you can develop your own support system, but finding people that have gone through some things. I don't like to say, I know what you feel like,
Right.
because, and know this, I always try to do this, everyone has good intentions. And when you lose someone, I think sometimes people just want to help and try to take it from that. It's good intended. The grief is very individual. Sometimes, depending where you are in your grief, that can sound very hurtful. It's like you're taking the pain and from my individual situation. And so I want to encourage everyone, try to have good intentions. People are going to try to help in different ways. But you know that your pain is real. Know that this is like Jason said, a normal reaction. But there are resources and ways to.
One of the things I wanted to re-mention was breathing and being outdoors. As a counselor for 20+ years, I've talked to, almost a dozen times. I've had people who were so grief-stricken or so traumatized that they would sit in session and we would get nowhere. We would literally get nowhere. And couldn't figure it out for a while. And one time I asked someone if they just wanted to walk. They literally couldn't talk, couldn't even breathe words, just sat there and sobbed. And when I got them to get up and walk, as soon as they started walking, they just started blah, 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 talk, sob, nonstop. And I was like, so interesting that you were stuck sitting, but as soon as you physically started moving, it just all came out, right? I'm kinesthetic, I'm hugely kinesthetic. If I'm not moving, I'm hangry, like I'm emotionally hangry if I'm not moving. So I constantly have to be moving. So I'm really keen on how physical movement, being outside, just literally going through the motions, even if you're not mentally present, gets you through it a lot faster and a lot easier, right? Like one of the things, like on one of these handouts that we're gonna talk about in a minute, it talks about how do you know you're making progress? Try just going through a whole day without crying. That's progress. That's like a milestone right there, right? So again, the things that you don't even think about just can be so cathartic for you. Movement, talking to people, just literally the simplest thing. So go ahead, sir. So obviously the unhealthy coping, right? Humans are not good at dealing with pain. They're just not good at dealing with pain. Physical pain, emotional pain. And unfortunately, humankind has found all kinds of creative ways to dull, mask, numb, etc. And so these can lead to habits that are very difficult to end, and they can lead to self-destructive behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, alcohol and drug use to mask your trauma, to mask your pain, is never a good approach, because it never forces you to acknowledge and work through it emotionally in an emotionally healthy way. Isolation is very bad. Our normal tendency when we get depressed is to isolate ourselves, right? We don't call people back, we don't reach out, we don't leave, we don't talk to people. This is a circular thing. It'll send you into another depression, because you will begin to realize you're isolated and feel like no one cares, and you will start to self-pity and self-negate and all that stuff. So you need to be around people, even if you're just kind of on the periphery. You need to be around people in this process. It helps drag you out of the process. Risk-taking behavior, same as alcohol, drug use. Some people tend to drive faster, drive without a seatbelt, do really stupid things when they're grieving, because they have this initial surge of carelessness as a gut reaction, as a knee-jerk reaction. There's actually a lot of studies on this based on suicide, high-profile suicides. A lot of risk-taking behavior happens after a high-profile suicide. People connect with it somehow. They connect with the pain, the emotion, and they start engaging in risk-taking behaviors. So there's a lot more accidents after something high-profile. But if you think about in the family, like if someone passes in the family and you have another family member may be exhibiting risk-taking behaviors, you may start exhibiting risk-taking behaviors. And so be mindful of that. Denial, it happens. You need to engage people and coping mechanisms so that you can work through any denial that you're experiencing. Next. Yours.
So here are some resources. One, being here at Estrella, we have free counseling services to our students. There is a counselor available Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 p.m. We have different modalities to meet you in person, virtual, over the phone. And so that's what we do. We do a brief solution focus. So the scope of our counseling, we don't do ongoing therapy, but we can be also a bridge to the community resources. We see that you do need a private counselor, ongoing therapy. That is also a way our office can help. If you are an employee, there are, through our Maricopa Community College District, there is counseling services that we encourage. Something that my counseling students, we talk about all the time. You know, I'm a counselor, I'm not the be all know all, and I love that because I'm a flawed human, and you know, we all go through these emotions. And so with that, understanding that counselors themselves can have seasons of life where they need counseling and support. And so it's a very humbling experience being on the other side. We try to understand and have that empathetic understanding that students and staff, that this is a moment in life where it's a very hard, dark place, and to be in that moment is very special. And so understand that when you come to us, you know, these are private conversations, you know, we're there to support in any way we can. And like I said, if we feel we would benefit from other resources, that's perfect. And so that's one. Faith-based, we spoke about, you know, churches, communities, you know, some churches offer support groups. You know, it's good to have a community of support. And so maybe the community support is somewhere else. You know, maybe there was, you know, you were part of a club or community organization. You know, that's the time those people will come together and support. We spoke about the books on grief, you know, trying to understand, you know, whether grief's on articles, there's websites, and just community. And with that, it's really interesting. This is how an example of how unique grief impacts. There may be people, again, all intended. I want to bring you food. I want to come over. I want to sit with you. I want to, you know, be with you. And maybe in that moment in time, you don't want that. Or not yet, and that's okay. And again, approaching it well intended, it's really interesting. Or on the other end, it's kind of like, why isn't anyone bringing me food? Or why isn't anyone sending me flowers or anyone calling me? And I think it's also powerful understanding some people don't know how to handle grief and how to handle your, what to say and how to say them. And so some of those things are helpful. Jason?
We have on your tables, there are packets of information that came from, some from like hospice, some from faith-based, and some just explaining what bereavement counseling is. Those are some of the resources that Catherine was referring to. This is largely informational, but it talks about like recognizing your own progress through grief. Don't be surprised when things like these happen. Talks about journaling, confronting loss, the importance of self-care while you're grieving. So all that is really, really, really important. Yeah.
So since we have many people online, is it possible to perhaps share some of these in digital format? So we
Yeah.
can send them out?
Yes, so for the online audience, what we do is scan a copy of each of these and we will send it with the presentation. Our copy of the presentation shortly after we're done here. Thank you for that. Next slide.
So ways to remember, again, you know, a loved one, just because they're physically not here, they're always gonna be with you. And so, it's really incredible. You know, if you've ever lost someone close to you, a loved one, it seems there's a moment when they're gone and you have service, and there's an influx of people and support, and then it ends. But you still have hurt, you still have loss, they're still gone. And you're still dealing with them. You know, you're dealing with holidays, you're dealing with their birthday, you're dealing with all the logistical things we said you're gonna have to do once they're gone. And your grief is still there. And so there are ways though to celebrate and remember their. And a couple things that we just wanted to give some examples. Planting can be healing for people. Some people will plant a tree or they'll plant something in the garden to remember a loved one. And that's something that they can watch over, they can take care of. It's a visual that they can see. Memory quilt bears boxes. I actually have a memory bear. Grief is very personal to me more recently. Last March, I lost my dad. And so this memory bear is actually 2 of his shirts. It was made for my 5-year-old daughter. She now calls it Alpha Bear. She sleeps with it. And in my way, it helps my grief because it's a way my daughter will connect with me. And so he's not physically here, but this is something that tangible that she can have to remember. Celebrations, food, over holidays. What was the favorite food that your loved one liked? What is something that you can do to remember? Some people will go out and they'll buy the perfume or cologne and they'll spray it every now and then, and that's the way they remember. Scents, you know, maybe there was something that they really loved to smell. And so, you know, it was candle fragrant or so on. Or even movies. Was there a movie or song that they really enjoyed that brings you back to them? And I'll let my colleague Jason talk more.
Yeah, these are really powerful things, and if you are somewhat of a I don't know how to describe it, a person who likes to be reminded annually of things. The birthdays are hard, right? When you've lost somebody, but one of the things I think is cool, like Catherine's talking about the bear made out of her father's shirts and stuff. Cooking, like my mom used to make these killer green chili enchiladas. So like I request them often and they're referred to as my mom's dish. And so that is powerful. The reason you walked into Patsy Cline today is because every time I hear Patsy Cline, I hear my mom. So that is powerful. The scents are super important and powerful as well because everybody had scent, right? If it was an old person, they probably smelled like Old Spice or Ben Gay or something, and it triggers you every time. My mom's was Coco Chanel. I think it was number 5 from way back in the day. And so every time I smell that, every time I hear Patsy Cline, the other thing is I like to drop my mom's phrases on people, like revenge is a dish best served cold. And she used to say, when it's raining and the sun is shining, it means the devil is laughing and it'll surely rain tomorrow. And she used to always, she was a little feisty, so she always used to drop these mean little phrases for people, and I still drop them on people. I'm like, that's from mom. But those are really, for me, those are important. Like, I don't, it's the traumatic part was hard, right? Like we expect. We talk about isolation and those kinds of things. I was thinking about when my mom passed. My dad vanished for 2 years. Like, I didn't physically see my dad for 2 years. So that journey of his grief journey, he literally isolated himself, which probably wasn't healthy. We could understand, my brother and I, but it was odd for us, right? Because you talk about not wanting to be isolated, and that's an unhealthy coping strategy. And the person who's going through the most grief that you're trying to support while you're going through your own grief has completely isolated themselves. Like literally, he didn't talk to us see us for about 2 years because he was dealing with his own grief, right? But come full circle, he always mentions these little things about my mom, which tells me that it just took him a long time to get through that whole grief cycle, right? To come full circle about how do you know that you're making progress through your grief. So again, these things are powerful in getting you along from day to day, getting you through the next year, getting you past that birthday, getting you past Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. I think, yeah, okay, so I shared, Catherine shared the memory bear, I shared Patsy Cline. So now we wanted to ask if anybody's comfortable to share about a positive memory you have of someone or a positive practice that you have employed in the memory of someone. Or a trinket or something you have. I had a friend named Lisa Torres, passed away when she was 26. And she gave me a keychain when we were in grade school. Still have it. But like trinkets, a positive practice, memory, anybody?
I do.
Yeah, go Terry.
So, my mom always made treats for Christmas, like cookies, and we called them strawberries, and fudge and things like that. And so when we were younger, she'd let us help her make it. So that's a memory. So the first Christmas she was gone, my sister lived in Maryland, but we made it together.
Yeah, very cool. Were they good?
Yes, it just wasn't quite the same without her, but yes, they were good. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great memories.
I can relate.
Thank you, Sherry, for sharing. It's special and a way to continue to remember those traditions.
Anybody else want to share a memory or trinket yet?
For me, when it came to my father, because me already having an older father as a child, my dad and I would always dance a song. If I could get another, because my dad said, you know, I'm already old. But the first thing my dad would say, he said, look, all right, baby girl, I'm old. So you don't know when I'm going now. But I don't want you to cry when I go. And that's always a song. So as a child, we'll always dance a song. And people like, why are you saying that? Your dad's not dead. Your dad's not dead. But and 2 years now, when my dad fell at the nursing and they amputated his foot, and my dad said, if you're not gonna give me regular food, then I'm not eating. So when he was admitted to another coma, I was like, okay, stay positive, be positive, stay calm, stay calm. And when he ended up passing on New Year's, because after that Tuesday, because it was Monday when they had New Year's, for karaoke night, I did that song, the song that my daddy loves. And it's like, that's a sad song, but it's a song, you know, it's like, I cried hearing it, but you know, it's okay. Because like I say, daddy's home now, right? It's okay. So, song is mine. I'm a songbird, I love songs. So that song is that's my song right there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Online? No?
We had a couple people share just food tends to be like
The food, yeah.
Food,
cooking Cajun food. Yeah, a colleague of ours mentioned that.
yeah.
It's delicious.
One thing that my family does like to remember, like my family that went passing, because I have two little nephews. And one way we like to tell them about like past family members is that we do an ofrenda. So an ofrenda is where we go ahead and put pictures up on an altar, and put their favorite foods, we light a candle, we tend to Mongolian flowers. And like we'll go ahead and tell their story. And even though like we know the people who passed, it's a way for us to remember them. And not only that, to kind of feel like it's okay now, in a weird way.
Right. Yeah, Day of the Dead's pretty big in my house. It wasn't growing up, I kind of made it that way. But it's oddly cathartic to have just the topic and the arts and the pictures of the people all the time in the house. It's really, I think it helps. Okay, so for my online audience, you don't have this in front of you, but we will scan it and send it to you. For those of you that are here, we have some resources for you to take with you. There's one from the Doogie Center or Dougie Center. It's called Don't Be Surprised When, and it's called Tips for Young Adults Who Are Grieving. So this is really focused on teens and 20-somethings who probably aren't expecting to go through stuff like this at a young age. And so it talks about don't be surprised when grief comes with a huge range of emotions, when it turns out to be so much more than just emotions, when it's hard to do things you used to be able to do, and on and on and on. There's great tips in here provided by the Dewey Center. From Hospice of the Valley, and Catherine got this information. It's just about journaling and confronting loss and regaining your center. It talks about journaling and other positive practices to get through your grief. The Credo reference, bereavement counseling, just kind of is an explanation of what is bereavement counseling, what the description of it. Complicated grief versus normal grief and those types of things. And again, grief comes in all forms. So again, we're kind of just talking about death today, but people experience grief over job loss, over divorce, over moving, over failures, like all kinds of stuff. So the range of grief is pretty fluid. So it doesn't just include losing someone to death. The importance of self-care while grieving, another major important factor. Movement, breathing, reflection, building in physical activity, spending intentional time focusing on your breathing and your thoughts, those kinds of things. And then from the bereavement newsletter, recognize your own progress through grief. This is kind of what I talked about, like drive somewhere by yourself without crying the entire time, right? Baby steps. Get through the day without feeling tired. Reach out to another in a similar situation. Find something for which to be grateful. Be patient with yourself through grief attacks. When my mom passed, I couldn't take a shower without crying. It was the weirdest thing. As soon as water hit me, like I could be fine anywhere else, it was water. It was the most bizarre. That's what I'm telling you. Grief is weird. Grief is weird. And it'll creep up on you in the most unlikely places at the wrong time, all the time. So, and just know that's all normal. That's part of the human experience. It's all normal. So there's really great tips in this information that Catherine collected from the community. Is there any other comments or questions or stories that anybody wants to share really quickly?
I have a question.
Yeah.
And it's more general. I guess I'm just curious, why are so many people uncomfortable talking about grief? Because that's one of the reasons I felt so isolated, was because people just wanted to act like everything was okay and didn't want to talk about it or hear what was going on or anything like that. And I was just curious. And my parents didn't plan. There was no plans for when my mom died so quickly. So I'm just curious, what's your thought on why is that a taboo topic?
Well, I'll answer from my own opinion, because it's unchangeable. And humans don't like unchangeable things. Death is permanent. And and I think it's so culturally ingrained in our religious conversations, our belief systems, the diversity of our thinking. And I think the element of planning has a kind of a corporate, non-emotional, kind of cold angle to it. And so I think humans are naturally uncomfortable with the topic of death. I can't tell you why people don't talk about it when they should. There could be many reasons why your parents never planned for it. I don't know why my parents over planned for it. I'm glad they did. They must have experienced something in their lives that caused them to say, you know what, we need to over plan for this for our kids. So I can't answer that for your parents. But I do know that death is a topic no one's comfortable talking about. You saw the woman in the YouTube video of the TED Talk. She lost 3 extremely important people to her in 1 year. And she's just made it a mission to go talk about it. So I think I think it's cultural, it's individual, and it depends on your parents' life experiences about why they decided to not plan. So yeah, anybody else?
Thank you for those insights. I guess for me, it wasn't just my parents. It was like most people that I tried to talk to, because I wanted someone to talk to, they just seemed really uncomfortable. So I really appreciate your insights. So thank you.
Listen,
I will share from a cultural studies perspective. Again, we're talking about culture in a monolithic or like a more generalizable way. Everyone's culture is complex. But for example, coming from a Latin American Mexican family, we're very present oriented. It's just kind of how we are. One great way to figure that out, Terry, is this idea that anytime you tell my family, nos vemos mañana, we'll see you tomorrow, they'll say, si Dios quiere, if God wants. That is not in my control to determine if I will be here tomorrow, and it is about today. And so my family, it's very hard to change that orientation, because for them, it's like, well, why am I gonna plan for something? You know, like it just, because it's a more of a present oriented culture. So it's about maybe more like, how do you frame the conversation and this fact of, yes, you're right, you're gonna be spending a lot of money, maybe even money you don't have right now, for something tomorrow when you know, and it's these are hard conversations, but I think the more you couch it and, you know, like, don't you want, you know, like, if si Dios quiere, well, what would you want, right? Like, if it's beyond us, yes, but what would you like to see? What would you like to wear? How would you like to be celebrated, right? And I feel like that has opened up more conversations with my family as a result of framing it more in it's not about God or the external, it's more you, like, how do you want us as a family to celebrate? And then they're like, oh, okay, I get it now, you know, and it changes. Is it a great conversation? Is it easy? No. But that's how we've been, my partner and I, we have had that conversation with my 86-year-old father-in-law who's got stage 4 cancer and emphysema, congestive heart failure. And he is like the most amazing person. He lives with us. My kids love him. Tata, they run to his room every day. And we always say, right, like, how would you like Sofia and Francisco, like, in those moments, how would we want to celebrate? And I think that has helped him to open up a little bit more. Like, oh, okay, yeah, me gustaría esto, like, I want this, I want that. So anyway, it's not easy. Maybe just figuring out what works for you and your family and figuring out just even how to, like, you know, maybe for him, it would be like, what are you so scared of? And he'd be like, well, because that's not something I can control. It's like, we're not trying to get you to control it. We're trying to figure out how would you like it to be. And that has helped open up some conversations.
That's really.
Yeah, I was gonna say thank you very much. That is so, both of you actually helped me tremendously. It gives me a lot more insight, because I have difficulty understanding because I feel so completely different.
Well,
So
maybe you're the one to change the narrative in your lineage, Terry.
yeah, it happened around my mom's experience. Yeah, people weren't too happy with me, but I was like, yeah. So thank you. And that both of those examples helped me tremendously. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Chris, relating to race, what is the percentage of people who just plan for death grief? I guess what I'm asking is, do you know the number related to my question?
So the number, no, but I think your question goes back to what Liz just talked about. Like some cultures are future oriented, some cultures are present oriented in terms of the time-space continuum. And my guess, being a student of multiculturalism and racial identity, is that minority cultures live in the moment. And so if I had to guess, I would say it's probably a larger portion of the Anglo population that pre-plans and follows through with this type of stuff, rather than minority culture who literally lives in the present, like Liz was talking about. There's only right now. We don't think about the future. We're not planning for tomorrow or next week. We're planning for we're enjoying right now. We're together right now. That's all that matters. So to generically and non-scientifically answer your question, I'm gonna say minority culture is probably really bad at pre-planning and talking about the stuff happening in the future because of the time orientation, like Liz talked about. It's all about right now. I don't have control over tomorrow. And so my guess would be less minorities pre-plan to answer that question. And I wouldn't have a raw number. I couldn't even come up with a raw number because it's probably not recorded very accurately. And it depends on what type of institutions people come through. Like, did you pass away at a hospital? Did you pass away at the Veterans Center? You know, what type, did you pass away in hospice? Did you pass away at home? So the reporting is drastically different for all those situations. An accident, an accidental, like the reporting, recording, and people involved in all those scenarios are so different. It would be hard to get any really good data out of that. I hope that answered that question. Yeah.
I think that a little bit of I think it's cultural. I think a lot of that is there, but I also think it's an educational piece. I think people don't understand a lot of components, like sitting around at a dinner table, family table, talking about those things. Or when I say educational, is you can't experience, but like hospice. If you've ever been to hospice, you don't get it till you go through it. So I think that becomes really hard when you're dealing with families and trying to plan or even talk about those things. You add all those elements in together and that makes it very difficult, but it's one of those things that goes back to, you know, where's the conversation start? And over planning could be something of love for their kids,
Right.
you know, so I think that's for what's next, so they
That's a
don't.
good way to put it. Yeah. My so when Rod passed away, I told my wife, I was like, I gotta go to this class tomorrow and tell them that their instructor passed away. Like this guy, he's been there since I started. She was like, oh, she was asking me about it. I'm like, you know, one day someone's gonna go do that for me. She's like, don't talk about that, Latina. Don't talk about that. We have to talk about it. It's gonna happen. So yeah, that's your point. Like it's taking care of your kids, right? Or you're the people you want to leave stuff to. Not what the hell do we do? She didn't tell us what to do. Any other questions, comments? Respecting people's wishes, if they are actually willing to give you their wishes, really respect their wishes, because they're not around to speak up for themselves anymore. So like it's kind of funny. I thought it was funny in the moment, and I still think it's funny, I guess. So my parents were not really religious, right? And then when my mom passed, my dad just kind of like lost it. And she specifically said, she was a DNR, she was a do not resuscitate. And she specifically said, no service. You cremate me. I know where you're gonna put me. No service. So what did my dad do? He took her leave. And so I was sitting there, my sister, my mom's oldest daughter that she had from her previous marriage, she's elbowing me. She's like, Mom is pissed. Like, Mom's spitting around in her grave, right? Like, I tried to tell him, he doesn't want to listen. Like, but that was for him. It wasn't for, it wasn't for us, wasn't for her. That was for him. Cause it was the only thing he could like make sense of. So we like let it slide. Like, okay, Dad. She said no service. So we're guessing that she's pissed right now, but we'll let it slide, Dad. This was for you.
I remember reading an article somewhere about how, and maybe this goes back to Patty's point of it's for the people you love. That services and the funeral, it's really for the people.
The survivors.
Yeah, it's not, it's maybe for our closure, it's for our, like, ritual of this very, loss and love. And so I, that's another thing that I've talked to my father about. It's not really for you, it's for God. And that he's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Right.
If it's for my family, I'm willing to have that conversation.
Right.
If it's for the kiddos, like I'm willing to have that conversation. I love the idea of the bear, by the way. I think I'm gonna steal that whenever. And sometimes I tell him he's gonna bury me because he's a fighter and he has gone through a lot in the 12 years he's lived with me. And I always am like, I feel like you're gonna one day, who knows, right? You just never know.
Right.
And then he's like, well, how do you want us to remember you? And I'm like, all right, let's have a conversation.
That's a good way to put it though. How do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, I wanted to add, share, but you can also do a pillow, taking their clothes and there's companies you can find, or if you have someone crafty, like that sews, or maybe you could take a class at Joann's, and it's a good way to cope and remember them. Taking a sewing class at Joann's, and you create it yourself, and that's a tribute for them that you did, and it's a way for me to continue conversations with my daughter. I have 3 children, so my boys have good memories of my daughter's 5, so I want her to remember. So that's another good way to keep a tangible reminder of their memory quilts, like you can t-shirts and create quilts. So there's all kinds of different tangible ways.
For that, my grandma on my father's side, she actually used to make her own things like that. So she had her own blanket she gave to me when I was 6 years old. So when her funeral came, I brought that with me for the funeral that my grandma made for me. So they don't touch it.
Well, that concludes our presentation. Is there any closing comments or questions or anything from anybody?
I just think these are very powerful conversations, and I'm really grateful that you all are offering these. And I hope that you'll keep offering them over and over, so as more people will hear about it and have time to participate.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate that. We are going to do a lot more programming over the next 12 to 24 months. So be looking out for the stuff. Yeah.
I did want to comment about the book. I do have 2 children, so I was wondering where you kind of got those photos and still here the writer.
Yes. So so the tear suit, my sister got on Amazon. If you go into any of the public libraries, they have books on sale too. Sometimes it's a hit or miss what you find, but Amazon. Some of these I just checked out from the public library, but you're welcome to come. And so those of you joining online, I brought a couple books. This is my mom's. Actually, it's called "It's Okay That You're Not Okay." And again, sometimes you can relate to the author. This author. She lost her husband, and so it was meaningful for my mom lost her husband. And so I can also share those of you online some of the titles of the books that we have here in person. The book that you're asking about, Tear Soup, is a children's book that talks about death, but it's also soothing for adults. I read it and I thought it was very good.
Can you just repeat the name of it?
Sure.
It's okay.
Tear
Oh,
Soup.
no, the other one.
It's okay to not be okay.
It's okay that you're not okay. I also have C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed.
Could you potentially share the list of the books when you send those other resources with the video? I would be grateful.
For the art of dying.
The Art of Dying, yeah, I think I'm familiar with that.
Thank you, all of you have been an incredible audience and
Yes, thank you, everybody, for coming. We appreciate it and be looking for more programming from us, starting in the fall.